In a quiet little town surrounded by dense woods and winding roads, Sarah Thompson stepped out of her truck, her boots hitting the gravel with a soft crunch. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the parking lot of a dimly lit bar that seemed to hum with energy. Sarah wasn't there for drinks or company. She had come to visit her older brother, who lived nearby. But what she didn't know was that this stop would become far more eventful than she ever imagined. Sarah was no ordinary woman. She carried herself with a quiet confidence, her posture straight and purposeful. Her tactical vest, worn from years of service, hinted at her background as a military canine handler. Beside her stood two German shepherds, Max and Rex. These weren't just pets. They were highly trained soldiers in their own right, veterans of dangerous missions overseas. Together, the trio had faced unimaginable challenges, forming a bond stronger than most people could ever understand. As Sarah adjusted the leashes in her hands, the sound of revving engines filled the air. A group of bikers emerged from the bar, their leather jackets adorned with patches and symbols that marked them as members of a local gang. They laughed loudly, their voices carrying over the rumble of their motorcycles. One glance at Sarah, and the mood shifted. Their eyes scanned her from head to toe, lingering on her dogs with obvious skepticism. It didn't take long for the mocking to begin. "Look at this," one biker called out, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "A girl and her puppies think they're tough enough to hang around here." The others joined in, their laughter echoing through the parking lot. Some made exaggerated kissing noises, while others pretended to cower in mock fear of Max and Rex. Dagger, the leader of the gang, stepped forward. He was a towering figure, his muscular frame accentuated by his sleeveless jacket. His beard was thick, and his piercing gaze locked onto Sarah, as if trying to intimidate her. "What's a pretty thing like you doing with these mutts?" he sneered, gesturing toward the dogs. "You think you can handle them? Or are they just for show?" Sarah didn't flinch. She'd heard comments like these before, both during her time in the military and in civilian life. People often underestimated her because of her gender, assuming she couldn't possibly be capable of handling such powerful animals. But Sarah knew better than to let their words affect her. Instead, she focused on Max and Rex, whose calm demeanor mirrored her own. The dogs sat obediently by her side, their ears perked up as if sensing the tension in the air. One particularly bold biker leaned down, attempting to pat Max on the head. "Aw, look at this big baby," he cooed, clearly trying to provoke a reaction. In an instant, Max let out a low, menacing growl. The biker froze, his bravado faltering as he realized the dog meant business. Dagger chuckled, dismissing the warning. "Relax, it's just a dog," he said, waving off the moment. But Sarah noticed something flicker in his expression, a hint of unease. Despite the growing hostility, Sarah remained calm. She tightened her grip on the leashes slightly, signaling to Max and Rex to stay alert but not aggressive. The scene unfolding around her felt almost surreal. Here she was, a decorated soldier with years of combat experience, being ridiculed by men who thought they were untouchable. Yet deep down, Sarah knew that appearances could be deceiving, and if these bikers pushed too hard, they might just learn that lesson the hard way. The bikers continued their taunts, growing bolder with each passing moment. Dagger, clearly enjoying the attention from his gang, took a step closer to Sarah. His heavy boots scuffed against the ground as he moved, his arms crossed over his chest in an attempt to appear even more imposing. "You hear that, boys?" he said, raising his voice so everyone could hear. "This lady thinks she's got some kind of army dogs here. What do you think? Think they're tough enough to take us on?" The question sparked a fresh wave of laughter among the bikers. One of them cracked his knuckles dramatically, while another flexed his arms and struck a mock fighting pose. The entire group seemed to feed off the energy, their confidence skyrocketing as they egged each other on. To them, this was just harmless fun, a chance to show off and prove their dominance in front of their peers. But Sarah wasn't fooled. She knew exactly what they were doing, trying to intimidate her into backing down. Dagger smirked, leaning in slightly as if sharing a secret. "Tell you what," he said, his voice dripping with arrogance. "If your dogs are as good as you say they are, maybe we should put 'em to the test. Let's see how those mutts hold up against real men." He gestured toward himself and his crew, who immediately cheered at the suggestion. It was clear they thought the idea of going up against trained military dogs was absurd, like swatting away flies or tipping over a cardboard cutout. Sarah didn't respond right away. Instead, she studied Dagger carefully, taking note of the way his eyes darted between her and the dogs. There was a flicker of uncertainty beneath his bravado, though he did his best to hide it. Max and Rex, sensing the shift in tension, remained perfectly still by her side. Their tails were relaxed, but their bodies were poised, ready to act at a moment's notice. Anyone who truly understood working dogs would recognize the subtle signs. They weren't just sitting there. They were waiting for a command. Finally, Sarah spoke, her voice calm but firm. "These aren't just mutts," she said, emphasizing the word. "They're highly trained animals. They've saved lives, and they've taken down threats far scarier than a bunch of loudmouths in leather jackets." Her words hung in the air, silencing the bikers for a brief second before they erupted into laughter again. Dagger shook his head, clearly unimpressed. "Oh, come on," he shot back, grinning widely. "You expect us to believe that? Dogs don't scare us. We eat dogs like these for breakfast." His friends roared with approval, slapping him on the back as if he'd just delivered the punchline of the century. But Sarah didn't rise to the bait. She simply raised an eyebrow, letting the silence stretch out until it became uncomfortable. When she finally broke the quiet, her tone had shifted, not angry, but deliberate. "Fine," she said, surprising everyone, including herself. "If you're so sure your crew can handle them, let's make it interesting. A little demonstration. My dogs against your guys. No weapons, just fists and feet." The bikers exchanged glances, unsure whether to take her seriously. Dagger hesitated for half a second before shrugging it off. "You're on," he declared, puffing out his chest. "But don't cry when your precious pets get shown up." Sarah nodded, unfazed. She turned her attention to Max and Rex, giving them a quick once-over to ensure their harnesses were secure. Then, without another word, she stepped back, putting a bit of distance between herself and the bikers. The crowd around them began to grow as curious onlookers gathered to watch the spectacle unfold. Some whispered bets under their breath, while others simply watched in stunned silence, unsure what to expect. As the tension mounted, Dagger motioned for two of his toughest-looking buddies to step forward. They cracked their necks and rolled their shoulders, eager to prove themselves. Meanwhile, Sarah crouched down beside Max and Rex, speaking softly to them in a language only they understood. Her words weren't commands yet. They were reassurances, reminders of the trust and bond they shared. When she stood up again, her expression was unreadable, but her posture radiated determination. The stage was set. The bikers were confident, fueled by adrenaline and peer pressure. Sarah, on the other hand, exuded quiet resolve. And somewhere in the middle stood Max and Rex, their loyalty unwavering, their instincts razor-sharp. Whatever happened next, one thing was certain: neither side was backing down anytime soon. The air was thick with anticipation as Sarah stood tall, her gaze unwavering. Dagger and his two chosen bikers had positioned themselves a few feet away, their postures tense and ready for action. The crowd that had gathered around them buzzed with excitement, some cheering for the bikers while others watched curiously, unsure of what to expect. Sarah remained calm, her focus sharp like a blade. She knew this wasn't just about proving a point. It was about showing respect for her dogs and their capabilities. Before anything could begin, Sarah stepped forward, raising a hand to signal for silence. Her voice cut through the noise like a whistle in a storm. "Let's get one thing clear," she said firmly, her tone leaving no room for argument. "These dogs aren't here to entertain you. They're highly trained professionals. If I let them off their leashes, they'll act according to their training, and trust me, it won't be pretty." Her words seemed to have little effect on Dagger, who smirked and rolled his eyes. Yeah, we get it," he said dismissively, flexing his arms again for dramatic effect. "Big bad dogs, blah blah. Just give us the signal already." His bravado was infectious, and his friends laughed along, clearly convinced they were about to make quick work of Max and Rex. But Sarah wasn't done laying down the rules. "If my dogs win, and they will, you apologize, publicly. And you leave me alone for the rest of my stay here," she continued, her voice steady and commanding. Dagger hesitated for a split second, glancing at his crew before nodding reluctantly. "Fine," he agreed, though his grin suggested he didn't believe for a second that he'd need to follow through. "But if we win," he trailed off, letting the unspoken threat hang in the air. Sarah didn't blink. "You won't," she replied simply, her confidence radiating like heat from a fire. With that, she turned her attention back to Max and Rex, crouching down once more to speak softly to them. Her hands moved gently over their heads, a gesture of reassurance that also served as a final check of their gear. Both dogs sat perfectly still, their eyes locked onto hers as if hanging on every word. To anyone watching, it might have looked like a tender moment, but those who understood working dogs knew better. This was preparation. This was focus. When Sarah rose to her feet again, the tension in the parking lot was palpable. Dagger motioned for his two companions to spread out slightly, forming a loose triangle around Sarah and her dogs. Their movements were clumsy compared to the precision Sarah had exhibited as she adjusted her stance and gave a final command to Max and Rex. "Stay." For a brief moment, everything went quiet. Even the distant hum of traffic faded into the background. All eyes were on Sarah, Dagger, and the two German shepherds standing calmly by her side. Then, with a sharp whistle, Sarah released them. Max and Rex sprang into action instantly, their powerful muscles propelling them forward with incredible speed. The bikers barely had time to react before the dogs were upon them. Dagger's first instinct was to charge at Max, thinking sheer size and strength would be enough to overpower the dog. But Max was faster than he anticipated, darting to the side and circling him with a fluidity that made Dagger stumble. Meanwhile, Rex focused on the other two bikers, weaving between them with calculated precision. One of the men swung wildly, aiming to grab Rex by the collar, but the dog ducked under his arm and countered with a swift nip to the ankle, causing the biker to yelp and stagger backward. The crowd erupted into murmurs, some gasping in surprise while others shouted encouragement to the bikers. Dagger, realizing his initial strategy wasn't working, tried to regain control by lunging towards Sarah instead, hoping to distract her. But before he could take more than 2 steps, Max intercepted him with a low growl, forcing him to pivot awkwardly. The biker's confidence began to waver as he realized he was completely outmatched. Sarah stood calmly on the sidelines, her expression unreadable. She didn't need to shout commands or intervene. Max and Rex were operating as a seamless team, their movements synchronized and purposeful. Every dodge, every feint, every counter was executed with military precision. It was clear to everyone watching that these weren't ordinary dogs. They were soldiers, trained to adapt and overcome any challenge thrown their way. As the seconds ticked by, the bikers' bravado crumbled. What started as a game of intimidation had quickly turned into a lesson none of them would soon forget. And Sarah, watching silently, knew exactly how this would end. The bikers' initial confidence was unraveling faster than they could keep up. Dagger, who had strutted into the challenge like a king entering his throne room, now found himself scrambling to maintain even a shred of dignity. His two companions weren't faring any better, one nursing a throbbing ankle after Rex's calculated nip, and the other swatting at thin air as Max darted around him with effortless agility. The dogs moved like shadows, unpredictable and relentless, their every step a testament to years of rigorous training. Sarah remained calm, her presence steady and unshakable. She didn't shout commands or cheer on her dogs. She didn't need to. Max and Rex were operating in perfect harmony, each movement deliberate and precise. Their bond with Sarah wasn't just about obedience. It was trust, forged through countless missions and shared experiences. To them, this wasn't a game or a spectacle. It was another task, another mission, and they approached it with the same focus and determination they would in any battlefield scenario. The crowd that had gathered began to shift from amusement to awe. At first, many had laughed along with Dagger, expecting the bikers to overpower the dogs within seconds. But as the confrontation unfolded, their expressions changed. Whispers rippled through the onlookers. "Did you see that? How are they so fast? Man, those dogs mean business." Some even stepped back instinctively, realizing the sheer power and intelligence radiating from Max and Rex. Dagger, meanwhile, was growing increasingly frustrated. He tried to regain control by switching tactics, charging directly at Sarah instead of focusing on the dogs. If he could distract her, maybe the dogs would hesitate or retreat. But his plan backfired almost immediately. Before he could take more than 2 steps towards Sarah, Max intercepted him with a deep, menacing growl. The sound sent a chill down Dagger's spine, freezing him mid-stride. For all his bluster, Dagger wasn't used to being challenged like this. Not by animals, not by anyone. Rex, meanwhile, continued to outmaneuver the remaining biker, circling him with an almost playful ease. The man swung wildly again, his frustration boiling over, but Rex ducked under his arm once more and delivered another quick nip to his leg. This time, the biker stumbled backward, landing hard on the gravel with a grunt. His face flushed red with embarrassment as he scrambled to get back on his feet, only to find Rex standing inches away, teeth bared in a silent warning. It was becoming painfully clear to everyone watching, including Dagger, that this wasn't going to end the way the bikers had planned. Every attempt to subdue the dogs ended in failure, and every failed attempt chipped away at their confidence. The bravado that had fueled their earlier taunts was crumbling under the weight of reality. These weren't ordinary dogs. They were disciplined, intelligent, and unstoppable when working together. As the chaos unfolded, Sarah took a moment to observe the scene. Her heart swelled with pride, not because her dogs were winning, but because they were proving something far greater. They were showing these men, and everyone else watching, that respect wasn't earned through arrogance or intimidation. It was earned through skill, dedication, and teamwork. And if there was one thing Sarah had learned during her time in the military, it was that true strength came from unity, not brute force. Finally, Dagger threw up his hands in exasperation, his chest heaving as he backed away from Max. Okay, he shouted, his voice tinged with desperation. "We get it. Your damn dogs are tough." The other 2 bikers, equally defeated, nodded in agreement, though neither dared to speak. One still clutched his bruised leg, while the other wiped sweat from his brow, looking utterly humiliated. Sarah let out a low whistle, signaling for Max and Rex to return to her side. Instantly, the dogs obeyed, trotting back to her with tails held high. They sat beside her, their bodies relaxed but alert, as if nothing had happened. To them, this was just another day's work. But to the onlookers, and especially to Dagger and his gang, it was a revelation. For a moment, no one spoke. The parking lot, which had been filled with noise and laughter moments ago, fell eerily silent. All eyes were on Sarah, who stood tall and composed, her hand resting gently on Max's head. She didn't gloat or rub salt into the wounds of Dagger's ego. Instead, she simply said, "I told you they're trained professionals. Never underestimate someone, or something, because of how they look." Her words hung in the air, carrying a weight that resonated with everyone present. Even Dagger, despite his bruised pride, couldn't deny the truth behind them. The silence that followed Sarah's words was deafening. Dagger stood frozen, his chest rising and falling with labored breaths as he tried to process what had just happened. His 2 companions were sprawled on the ground, one clutching his leg while the other leaned against a nearby truck for support. The crowd of onlookers, once raucous and mocking, now stared in stunned disbelief. It wasn't just the fact that Max and Rex had dominated the bikers. It was how they did it. The dogs hadn't relied on brute force or aggression. Instead, they used precision, strategy, and teamwork to outmaneuver their opponents. Sarah turned her attention back to Max and Rex, speaking softly to them in a voice only they could hear. She praised them quietly, running her hands over their sleek coats as if thanking them for a job well done. To anyone watching, it might have seemed like an ordinary moment between a handler and her dogs, but those who understood the depth of their bond knew better. These weren't pets. They were partners, soldiers who had earned every ounce of respect through years of service. Dagger finally broke the silence, clearing his throat awkwardly as he straightened up. His usual swagger was gone, replaced by something more subdued. Humility, perhaps, or maybe just sheer embarrassment. "All right," he muttered, glancing at his crew before looking directly at Sarah. "You win. Your dogs, they're good." He paused, rubbing the back of his neck as if searching for the right words. "Better than good. They're incredible." His admission caught everyone off guard, including Sarah. She raised an eyebrow slightly but didn't say anything, allowing him to continue. Dagger shifted uncomfortably under her gaze, clearly unused to admitting defeat or apologizing. "We underestimated you," he admitted reluctantly, his voice quieter now. "And your dogs. Guess we were wrong about that." Sarah nodded slowly, accepting his apology without gloating. "It's not about being right or wrong," she said evenly, her tone measured and calm. "It's about understanding that appearances can be deceiving. Just because someone, or something, looks different doesn't mean they're weak. My dogs are proof of that." Her words struck a chord with the onlookers. Some nodded in agreement, while others exchanged thoughtful glances. Even Dagger seemed to take them to heart, his shoulders sagging slightly as if carrying the weight of his earlier arrogance. For the first time since the confrontation began, he looked genuinely reflective. One of the bikers who had been knocked down earlier limped forward, wincing as he moved. He stopped a few feet away from Sarah, hesitating before speaking. "Can I, pet one of them?" he asked, his voice hesitant and almost childlike. The question surprised everyone, including Sarah, who blinked in mild disbelief. After everything that had happened, this biker, a man who had mocked her and her dogs just minutes ago, was asking for permission to interact with them. Sarah glanced at Max and Rex, who sat patiently by her side. Both dogs were alert but calm, their tails wagging slightly as they observed the scene. "Sure," she said after a moment, gesturing toward Rex. "But remember, he's still a working dog. Be respectful." The biker nodded eagerly, approaching Rex with slow, deliberate movements. When he reached out to touch the dog's head, Rex didn't flinch or pull away. Instead, he leaned into the touch, his ears perking up as if acknowledging the gesture. A ripple of laughter spread through the crowd, not mocking this time, but warm and appreciative. As the biker grinned sheepishly. "Man, he's huge," he said, shaking his head in amazement. "I thought I could take him down. Turns out, I couldn't even keep up." The moment broke the tension, softening the atmosphere significantly. Other bikers began stepping forward, curiosity replacing hostility as they marveled at Max and Rex. Questions poured in. How long does it take to train them? Do they always listen to you? What kind of missions have they been on? Sarah answered each query patiently, sharing snippets of her experiences in the military and explaining the rigorous training process her dogs had undergone. As the conversation unfolded, something remarkable happened. The biker's attitude shifted entirely. What had started as mockery and disrespect transformed into admiration and even gratitude. Dagger, in particular, seemed deeply affected. He approached Sarah cautiously, extending a hand in a gesture of peace. "Look, I'm sorry about earlier," he said sincerely. "We shouldn't have treated you like that. You've got our respect. And theirs too." he added, nodding toward Max and Rex. Sarah accepted his handshake, her grip firm but not aggressive. "Apology accepted," she replied simply. "Just remember, never judge a book by its cover, or a handler by her dogs." With that, the confrontation came to an end, not with anger or bitterness, but with mutual understanding. The next morning, the small town buzzed with talk of what had happened in the parking lot. Word spread quickly, how a quiet woman with 2 German shepherds had humbled Dagger and his gang. People who weren't even there began recounting the story, adding their own embellishments as it passed from one person to another. By midday, Sarah's name, and the names Max and Rex, were on everyone's lips. The bikers themselves didn't try to hide what had happened. Instead, they owned up to their mistake, telling anyone who asked that they'd been taught a valuable lesson. Dagger, still nursing his bruised ego, but visibly humbler, decided to take things a step further. Later that afternoon, he sent one of his crew members to find Sarah at her brother's house. They knocked on the door hesitantly, holding out an envelope. Inside was a handwritten note apologizing again for the disrespect she'd faced and inviting her to join them for dinner at the bar later that evening. It wasn't much, but it was clear Dagger wanted to make amends, not just for himself, but for his entire group. Sarah read the note carefully, her expression unreadable. Her brother, sitting nearby, raised an eyebrow. "You're not actually thinking of going, are you?" he asked, half-jokingly. He knew how rough those bikers could be, and he worried about his sister walking into what might still be a hostile environment. But Sarah surprised him by nodding slowly. "Why not?" she said with a small smile. "They reached out. That takes courage, especially after everything that went down. Besides, maybe this is a chance to show them something else, something beyond intimidation or dominance." Her decision shocked more than a few people when she walked into the bar that evening, Max and Rex by her side. The room fell silent as all eyes turned to her. Dagger stood near the counter, looking unusually nervous. When Sarah approached, he cleared his throat and gestured toward a table where food had been laid out. "We didn't know if you'd come," he admitted, scratching the back of his neck. "But we figured. Well, we owe you this much." Sarah nodded graciously and took a seat, Max and Rex lying down beside her chair like loyal sentinels. At first, the conversation was awkward, filled with long pauses and forced pleasantries. But as the night wore on, the atmosphere began to shift. Curiosity got the better of the bikers, and they started asking questions, not just about the dogs, but about Sarah herself. Where had she served? What kind of missions had she been on? How did she end up working with K9 units? Sarah answered patiently, sharing stories of her time overseas. She talked about the bond she shared with Max and Rex, describing moments of triumph and heartbreak alike. She explained how these dogs weren't just tools. They were companions, protectors, and sometimes even lifesavers. One story stood out, a mission where Rex had detected an improvised explosive device, i.e., hidden under rubble, saving an entire squad from certain death. As she spoke, the bikers listened intently, their earlier arrogance replaced by genuine admiration. At one point, Dagger leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "So, what made you want to do this job?" he asked, his tone softer now. "I mean, most women don't exactly sign up for stuff like this." Sarah thought for a moment before answering. "I guess I wanted to prove something, to myself more than anyone else. Growing up, I always heard about the things women couldn't do. So I decided to focus on what I could do. And when I found out about K9 units, it felt like the perfect fit. These dogs, they see past all the labels, the doubts, the stereotypes. To them, I'm just their handler, their partner. That kind of trust, it changes you." Her words resonated deeply with the men around her. Many of them nodded silently, some exchanging glances as if realizing how narrow-minded they'd been. Dagger, in particular, seemed moved. "Guess we've got a lot to learn," he said finally, raising his glass in a toast. To Sarah, Max and Rex, for showing us what real strength looks like." The room erupted in cheers as glasses clinked together. For the first time, Sarah felt truly accepted, not because she'd won a challenge, but because she'd opened a door to understanding. By the end of the night, the bikers weren't just respecting her. They were inspired by her. And as she left the bar, surrounded by newfound allies, Sarah couldn't help but feel hopeful. Maybe, just maybe, change was possible, even in places where it seemed least likely. The days that followed Sarah's unexpected dinner with the bikers brought a noticeable shift in the town's atmosphere. What had once been a place defined by tension and stereotypes began to transform into something more open-minded. Dagger and his gang, who were often seen as troublemakers, started behaving differently. They no longer swaggered around with the same arrogance or picked fights at the bar. Instead, they seemed quieter, more reflective, like men who had been humbled but also enlightened. Word of Sarah's encounter spread beyond the immediate circle of onlookers, reaching even those who hadn't witnessed the showdown firsthand. People stopped her on the street to ask about Max and Rex, their curiosity genuine and respectful. Shopkeepers waved her over to share stories of how Dagger's group had helped carry boxes or fix broken equipment without being asked. It was as if the entire town had taken a collective step back to reconsider its assumptions, not just about Sarah, but about themselves. One afternoon, while Sarah was visiting her brother's repair shop, Dagger himself showed up unexpectedly. He pulled his motorcycle into the driveway, stepping off awkwardly as if unsure whether he was welcome. But Sarah greeted him warmly, inviting him inside. Over coffee, Dagger opened up about his life in ways he never had before. He spoke candidly about growing up in the town, feeling trapped by expectations, and using intimidation as a way to mask his insecurities. "I didn't think much about respect until last night," he admitted, stirring his cup absently. "You made me realize it's not about scaring people. It's about earning their trust." Sarah listened patiently, nodding along as Dagger continued. "Your dogs, they don't need to prove anything. They just are what they are. Strong, loyal, disciplined. And you're the same way. You don't have to shout or fight to show us your worth. That's something I want to learn." His honesty caught her off guard, but she appreciated it. For all his rough edges, Dagger clearly wanted to change, and that meant something. Encouraged by this newfound openness, Sarah decided to stay in town a little longer than planned. She organized a small demonstration at the local park, inviting anyone interested to watch Max and Rex perform basic obedience drills and advanced tactical maneuvers. The turnout was far greater than she expected. Families brought their children. Curious teenagers lined up to take photos, and even some of the older townsfolk showed up, eager to see the legendary dogs in action. During the demonstration, Sarah explained each exercise in simple terms, emphasizing the importance of patience, consistency, and trust in training working dogs. She let kids pet Max under supervision, laughing softly as he licked one boy's hand and sent him giggling into his mother's arms. When someone asked if her dogs ever got tired of following orders, she smiled and shook her head. "They love having a purpose," she said. "It gives them focus, just like it does for me." By the end of the event, the crowd erupted into applause, cheering not just for Max and Rex, but for Sarah too. Some approached her afterward to thank her personally, sharing personal struggles or expressing admiration for her courage. One elderly woman hugged her tightly, tears in her eyes. "You remind me of my granddaughter," she said softly. "She joined the military last year, and I worry about her every day. Seeing you here, with your strength and kindness, it makes me proud." Even Dagger attended the demonstration, standing quietly near the back with his crew. Afterward, he approached Sarah with a sheepish grin. "Think you could teach us a thing or two?" he asked, gesturing toward his friends. Not about handling dogs, obviously, but about being better leaders, better people. Sarah hesitated for only a moment before nodding. "Sure," she said simply. "But remember, it starts with respect. respect for others, for yourself, and for the choices you make every day. Dagger nodded solemnly, as if committing her words to memory. As the sun set over the park, casting golden light across the faces of the townspeople, Sarah felt a deep sense of fulfillment. This visit, meant to be a short stopover, had become so much more. By standing her ground and showing compassion, she had sparked a ripple effect of change. The bikers weren't perfect, and neither was the town, but everyone was trying. And sometimes, that was enough. As Sarah packed her truck a few days later, preparing to leave the small town behind, she couldn't help but reflect on everything that had happened. What began as a simple visit to see her brother had turned into something far greater, an unexpected lesson in courage, respect, and the power of leading by example. Max and Rex sat patiently beside her, their tails thumping softly against the ground as if they, too, understood the significance of this moment. Her brother leaned against the hood of the truck, arms crossed, a thoughtful expression on his face. "You really made an impact here, sis," he said finally, breaking the quiet. "I've lived in this town for years, and I've never seen Dagger or his crew act like this. They're actually helping people now, fixing fences, volunteering at the community center. It's kind of amazing." Sarah smiled softly, glancing toward the horizon, where the sun was beginning its slow descent. "It wasn't me," she replied modestly. "They did it themselves. All I did was show them what was possible when you treat others with respect, and when you let actions speak louder than words." Her brother chuckled, shaking his head. "Yeah, well, all you did was take down a gang of bikers with 2 dogs. No big deal, right?" His teasing brought a laugh from Sarah, lightening the mood as she secured the last of her gear in the back of the truck. Despite his sarcasm, she knew he was proud of her, not just for standing up to Dagger, but for handling the situation with grace and integrity. Before leaving, Sarah decided to make one final stop, the bar where it all began. When she walked in, the familiar faces greeted her warmly, some raising their glasses in acknowledgement. Dagger was there, sitting at a corner table with his crew. He stood up immediately, walking over to meet her halfway. "Hey," he said, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. "Just wanted to say thanks again, for everything. We've got a long way to go, but we're trying. That's gotta count for something, right?" Sarah nodded, meeting his gaze with a look of understanding. "Trying is more than most people do," she said simply. "Keep going, Dagger. You'll surprise yourself." Her words seemed to resonate deeply with him. He gave her a firm nod, his usual bravado replaced by quiet determination. As she turned to leave, several patrons called out their goodbyes, wishing her safe travels. One man even handed her a small wooden carving of a German shepherd, explaining that his son had made it as a token of gratitude. Sarah accepted it with a heartfelt smile, promising to treasure it always. Back outside, she climbed into the driver's seat of her truck, Max and Rex settling into their spots in the back. For a moment, she sat there, letting the weight of the past week sink in. She hadn't come to this town looking for trouble or change, but sometimes life had a way of surprising you. Through her actions, she had shown Dagger and his gang that strength wasn't about dominance or intimidation. It was about earning trust, showing compassion, and standing firm in who you are. As she pulled away, waving goodbye to the townspeople gathered near the road, Sarah felt a renewed sense of purpose. This experience reminded her why she loved being a K9 handler, not just because of the bond she shared with Max and Rex, but because of the opportunities it gave her to inspire others. Whether on a battlefield overseas or in a sleepy little town, the lessons remained the same. Lead with integrity, respect without judgment, and never underestimate the power of teamwork. The road stretched ahead of her, winding through hills and forests bathed in the golden light of sunset. Beside her, Max and Rex rested peacefully, their loyalty unwavering. As the miles rolled by, Sarah allowed herself a small smile. The journey wasn't over. It never truly was. But for now, she was content knowing she had made a difference. And somewhere deep inside, she hoped the people she'd met along the way would carry that difference forward, proving that even the toughest hearts could learn to grow.